There is no sound in this world more chilling than the voice of your own daughter directing where to dig your grave. There is no betrayal more vicious than realizing the hands you once guided are the same hands that hammered your coffin shut. One might think this is the script for a horror film, but it is the true story of my life. I, Eleanor Hayes, at 75 years old, had to claw my way out of a grave planned by my own flesh and blood, carrying a truth almost too heavy to bear. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because some truths need to be spread, even if they might shake your faith. Some stories, no matter how painful, must be told. The smell of damp earth was the first thing I felt when I woke up inside that makeshift coffin. The second was the voice of my own daughter, saying where my grave should be dug. Right here is good, no deeper than this. Nobody's going to look for a missing old woman on an abandoned ranch. She said it with a casualness that chilled my blood more than the damp wood on my back. My heart pounded, but my mind, thank God, remained calm, as only 70-something years of life can teach you. I took a deep, slow breath, so as not to make a sound. While my eyes adjusted to the near-complete darkness, my hands were already feeling around, searching for anything I could use, a loose nail, a splinter of wood, a crack. At that moment, I realized that the decades spent working with locks would either save me, or I would be buried alive by my own child. My name is Eleanor Hayes, but those who know me in Phoenix call me Miss Ellie. I've got 75 years on my back. I was born in a small town in Louisiana, and I ended up in this stretch of the Arizona desert more than 50 years ago, when I was just a dreamy young woman with a suitcase of clothes and the promise of a job at a hardware store. It was in that store that I met my Walter, God rest his soul. We started as employees and ended up as owners of the place. A simple life, of hard work, but honest, and with its joys. Anyone who sees me today, all put together in my condo with a view of the mountains small, but paid for with sweat, can't imagine that this old woman with gray hair and calloused hands has faced things not even horror movies show. I need to know how far this story will go, because there are many people who doubt that a woman of 75 has gone through this and survived. They think it's the invention of a senile old woman seeking attention. But I have proof, and I have scars, some you can see. Others I carry inside, like the one from knowing my own blood, planned to bury me alive for money. After my Walter passed away 10 years ago from a massive heart attack while fixing a lock. Ironic, isn't it? The man spent his life opening paths only to leave this world through a door no one has a key to. My life settled into a gentle rhythm. I'd wake up early, make my strong coffee, grab my straw hat, and go for a walk in the park before the sun got too hot. I had my friends from the Wednesday bingo game, Margaret, Joyce, and Barbara, who, to be honest, gossiped more than they played. Every now and then I'd go to the store, which was now in the hands of Frank, our trusted manager of 30 years, just to take a look, see if everything was in order. The smell of sawdust and machine oil always brought back a flood of memories of Walter, and for a moment it felt like he was right there beside me. It wasn't an eventful life, but it was mine, you know? It had comfort, it had peace. Then, one Sunday morning, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I nearly fell over. It was Jessica, my only daughter, whom I hadn't seen in person in 15 years. She was thinner, her hair was different, wearing clothes that looked expensive. "Hi, Mom," she said, as if she had seen me last week. I was speechless, my knees wobbling. The last time I had been with her was after Walter's brother's funeral, when we had that ugly fight about money. She stormed out, slamming the door, saying we were too cheap and she would never set foot in this house again, and she kept her word, you see. Nothing more than some printed birthday cards and a few short phone calls on holidays when she remembered. "Can I come in?" she asked. And I, being the fool I am, opened not just the door, but my arms and my heart. A mother is like that, right? No matter how much time passes, no matter the hurt, when a child returns, we welcome them. As I held her, the memories flooded back. Jessica had always been different. While Walter and I were content with our simple life, she dreamt of mansions and imported cars, cutting pictures from fashion magazines for her My Future notebook. The complaints started in her teens. Our house was too small, our clothes too cheap. The final straw came when she was 22. She demanded $50,000 for a risky business venture, and when Walter asked for a proper plan, she called us stingy. "One day I'll come back rich," she screamed before slamming the door, "and you'll regret not believing in me." And for 15 years, she kept her word, with nothing more than a few printed birthday cards and a quick cold appearance at her father's funeral. But now, seeing her so broken on my sofa, all of that history melted away. She told me she was separated, that her rich husband had cheated and left her with nothing. "I spent years chasing an empty life, Mom," she cried. "I pushed away the only people who truly cared. And my mother's heart, the one that never learns, believed every word." A mother is like that, right? No matter how much time passes, no matter the hurt, when a child returns, we welcome them. She told me she was separated, that she had gone through some financial rough patches, her words, and that she had felt an immense desire to reconnect with me. "I'm in a phase of appreciating what really matters, Mom, and you matter. I want to take care of you now." She said it with those brown eyes, identical to her father's. How could I not believe her? The first few days seemed like a dream. Jessica cleaned the house, did the shopping, cooked my favorite dishes. She even made the gumbo I had taught her to make as a girl, just like the way we made it back in Louisiana. She took me to doctors I didn't even know I needed to see. She organized my pills in boxes with alarms, bought new curtains for the bedroom. A perfect daughter, you know. I even felt guilty for having been so hurt by her for so long. "You see, Walter," I would think, looking at his portrait on the shelf, "our girl is back. You always said she would mature one day." She made a point of knowing everything about my life. She asked about my bingo friends, the neighbors, the hardware store, my schedules, my habits. At first, I thought it was genuine interest, that she was trying to make up for lost time. She wrote everything down in a little notebook with tiny handwriting. "It's so I don't forget anything important about you, Mom," she would explain with a smile. Oh, how I missed the time when I still believed in that smile. One afternoon, while we were having tea on the balcony, she started asking more specific questions about the life insurance Walter had left. "How much was the policy, Mom? Have you received everything for the condo deed? Is it just in your name? Or is there any pending probate? My savings? Do you keep it in a savings account, or do you have a better investment?" At the time, I didn't find it so strange. After all, a daughter should know these things about her elderly mother, right? But today, thinking about it all from a distance, I see the signs my stubborn mind refused to see. It's a lonely and terrifying place to be, isn't it? When the person you should trust the most becomes the source of your deepest fear. Eleanor's instincts are screaming, even if her heart refuses to listen. Stay with us as we uncover just how dark Jessica's care is about to become. One day, she showed up with a man in a suit, all dapper, a leather briefcase in hand. "Mom, this is Mr. Martin Vance, a lawyer friend of mine. He's here to help us organize your documents, to make things easier for the future." The so-called lawyer spoke to me as if I were a 5-year-old child, explaining basic concepts with that irritating patience. They wanted me to sign some papers to facilitate the transition of assets, to avoid future bureaucracy, for my own good. That day, I faked a bad dizzy spell so I wouldn't have to sign anything. Jessica was visibly annoyed but hid it in front of the lawyer. "We'll try another day when you're feeling better," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was after that she started putting a strange little powder in my afternoon tea. I noticed, even after washing the cup well, a small white residue would be left at the bottom. The first day I noticed, I pretended to drink it and threw it in the living room plant when she wasn't looking. Poor Fern. The next day it was already wilted. Whatever that powder was, it was not good. I started pretending to drink the tea, throwing a little at a time into the pot by the window when she was distracted, or saying it was still too hot and letting it cool until she left the room, when I would pour it down the sink. The night started getting strange, too. I would wake up with the feeling that someone had been in my room, gone through my things. Objects would move. My glasses, which I always left on the nightstand, would appear on top of the dresser. The pillbox would be in a different order. The closet door I was sure I had closed would be ajar. When I mentioned it to Jessica, she would shake her head with a worried expression. "Mom, are you forgetting things? It's normal at your age. I'm worried about these memory lapses." Little by little, she planted the idea in my head, and in the heads of those who knew me, that I was becoming senile, that I could no longer make my own decisions, that I needed constant supervision. And the worst part is that I myself began to doubt my own sanity. Was I really forgetting things? Was I mixing up my medications? Was my mind no longer working properly? It's a terrible kind of psychological torture, you see. They make you doubt the one thing you are sure is yours, your own mind. And 3 months after her arrival, something happened that woke me up from this slow-motion nightmare. She had gone out quickly to buy bread, leaving her laptop open on the living room table. I've never been one to snoop, but something pushed me to take a look at the screen. It was open to a search page, and the history showed recent searches. How to fake natural death in the elderly, decomposition time of bodies in different soils, side effects of sleeping pills in people with high blood pressure. I felt a chill in my stomach I had never felt before. Not even when Walter died. Not even when I almost lost the store in a robbery in the 90 seconds. It was a different kind of cold. The cold of someone who realizes the danger is inside the house, sleeping in the next room. I closed the laptop exactly as it was and went back to my room, my heart beating so hard I thought I was going to have a stroke right there. That night, I pushed the dresser against the bedroom door and slept, or rather, stayed wide awake with a pair of scissors under my pillow. The truth is colder and sharper than any blade. In that instant, Eleanor's world shrinks to the size of her own home, now a prison with her own daughter as the warden. But this isn't a story about a victim. It's about a survivor. Keep listening to discover how a 75-year-old woman begins to fight back against the unimaginable. The next morning, she served me coffee as if nothing had happened. She talked about the weather, a sale at the supermarket, a movie that was on television, and I, pretending I knew nothing, smiled and agreed, while my mind was working like a machine. I had to be prepared for whatever she was planning. I couldn't confront her yet. She might do something drastic if she realized I had found out. I had to be smarter than her. That night, she came with a steaming cup in her hand. "I made a special tea for you, Mom. It's chamomile with lemon balm from Mrs. Miller's garden. It will help you sleep better." The tea had a strange color, darker than usual, and a sweetish smell that wasn't just herbs. I smiled, thanked her, and pretended to take small sips while we chatted about some soap opera. When she turned her back to fix a cushion, I poured some into the plant. When she left the room for a moment, I threw some more out the window. In the end, I pretended to have finished it all. "What a delicious tea, dear. I'm even feeling a nice sleepiness coming on," I lied, faking a yawn. She smiled, satisfied, and helped me to my room. I lay down. I pretended that sleep was coming quickly. "Good night, Mom." "Sleep well," she said, turning off the light and closing the door. As soon as I heard her footsteps fading away, I opened my eyes and stayed alert. Something told me this would not be an ordinary night. I don't know how long I lay there in the dark, pretending to sleep. It could have been an hour. It could have been 3. At some point, I heard my bedroom door open very slowly. I kept my breathing steady, my eyes closed, my body relaxed, like someone in a deep sleep. I felt more than saw a presence approaching the bed. It was Jessica. I'm sure because of the perfume she wore. She stood there for a while, watching. Then I heard a soft sigh and the sound of something being placed on the floor. It sounded like a bag or a backpack. "She's completely out," she whispered. I don't know if to herself or to someone on the phone. "Come pick us up in half an hour. I've arranged everything. No one will suspect a thing." I felt cold fingers checking my pulse, then lifting my eyelid. I remained motionless, as if I were really drugged. She left the room, leaving the door ajar. I waited a few minutes, then got up without making a sound. I had to find out what she had planned. I went to the door and peeked. The living room was in shadow, lit only by a small lamp. Jessica was on the phone with her back to me. "I've already arranged the insurance. Everything is set. $500,000. Plus the condo, which must be worth over $800,000 now with that mountain view. No one will suspect. They'll think the old woman left the house disoriented and got lost. It happens all the time with these senile old folks. I've already spread the story of her mental confusion to everyone. Yes, the box is in the car. I brought it from the old man's store. There's a certain irony, isn't there? Box? What box? A shiver ran down my spine when I understood. A makeshift coffin. My own daughter had made a coffin with lumber from our hardware store to bury me. I went back to the room without making a sound. My head was spinning. I had to think fast. I opened the dresser drawer and took my documents, a little money I kept hidden inside an old Bible, and a photo of Walter. I put everything in a fanny pack I used for my walks and put it on under my nightgown. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I wouldn't go down without a fight. I went back to bed and resumed my position, pretending to be fast asleep. It didn't take long. I heard footsteps again, more than one person now. The door opened and the hallway light briefly illuminated the room. "Are you sure she won't wake up?" a male voice whispered. "I gave her enough to knock out a horse," Jessica replied. "Let's go. Help me wrap her in the sheet." I felt hands lifting me, wrapping me in my own bedsheet. I kept my body limp, my breathing slow. They carried me out of the room, through the living room, to the front door. I heard the sound of a parked car with the engine running. The night was cold, the desert wind hitting my face, partially covered by the sheet. They laid me down on the back seat of the car. "Drive carefully," Jessica instructed. "We don't want to get pulled over with an unconscious old woman in the car." "Relax," the man replied. "At this hour, there's no one on the road to the ranch." The car started moving. Through a slit in the sheet, I saw we were leaving Phoenix, taking the highway that leads out to the desert. My heart was beating so hard I thought they could hear it, but they were chatting calmly in the front seat, as if they were going for a Sunday drive. "How long until the insurance pays out?" the man asked at some point. "About 30 days after they declare her presumed dead," Jessica replied. "I've already bribed the investigator not to look too hard. It'll look like she wandered off, disoriented, and probably died of exposure in the desert. And the condo? I can sell it as soon as I have the death certificate. I already have an interested buyer. They talked about my death, my house, my insurance money, with the same casualness as someone discussing a grocery list." I swallowed my tears, swallowed my fear. It wasn't time to feel. It was time to think, to plan. I had to survive to expose those two. After about an hour's drive, the car turned onto a dirt road. The bumps threw me from side to side on the seat, but I continued to pretend to be unconscious. Finally, we stopped. I heard the doors open. I felt the cold, pre-dawn air as they took me out of the car. "Get the shovel from the trunk," Jessica ordered. "The box is already here. Let's get this over with." They carried me a little further and then placed me on something hard. The box. Rough wood on my back, the smell of damp earth all around. I heard the sound of nails being hammered, sealing the lid above me. They didn't close it completely, leaving a crack through which a sliver of moonlight entered. Maybe they thought it wasn't worth spending too much time, since I would never wake up anyway. And that's how I ended up in the situation I started this story with. Awake inside a makeshift coffin, listening to my own daughter direct where to dig my grave on an abandoned ranch in the Arizona desert. This is the moment where hope seems to die, buried under the weight of betrayal and damp earth. Every sound from the outside is another nail in the coffin of a life she once knew. But Eleanor carries something her daughter never counted on: a lifetime of skill and an unbreakable will. Don't go anywhere, because what happens next is a testament to the fact that you can't bury a spirit that refuses to be broken. The tea hadn't knocked me out as she expected, and now I had a chance, a small one, but a chance to survive. As I listened to the sound of shovels digging into the earth, I began to feel the sides of the box, looking for a weakness, an exit. My fingers found a loose nail, poorly fixed in the cheap wood. She also began to meddle with my routine, always with the excuse of taking better care of me. First, it was the medications. "Mom, these medications you're taking are very old. There are much better things on the market today. But dear, I've been taking these for years. I do well on them, doctor. Silvera always renews the prescriptions." That doctor is outdated. I made an appointment with a new specialist, super renowned. He'll prescribe better things. And so, in a few weeks, my little white blood pressure pills were replaced with blue ones that made me strangely drowsy. The pills for my joint pain, which I took rarely, became a daily regimen of capsules that left my mouth dry. There was always a new supplement, a new medicine, a new vitamin. It's for your own good, Mom. You need to take better care of yourself at this age. Then it was my friends. Jessica began to create little intrigues, plant doubts, make seemingly innocent comments that slowly poisoned my friendships of decades. Did you know that Margaret talks about your retirement savings behind your back? I heard her mentioning it to her daughter at the supermarket. Joyce asked if you still have that piece of Grandma's jewelry. I thought her interest was strange. Barbara took a silver spoon when she came for coffee. I'm sure of it. I counted the set after she left and one was missing. I resisted at first. I defended my friends. What are you talking about, dear? I've known Margaret for 30 years. Joyce was just being polite. She always admired that brooch. Barbara is too honest. You must be mistaken, but the constant dripping wears away the stone, doesn't it? After hearing these things so many times, I started to look at my friends differently, to doubt their intentions, to pull away. The Wednesday bingo game, which was the joy of my week, was the first thing to disappear from my routine. There was always some appointment, a doctor's visit, a sudden feeling of being unwell that prevented me from going. My friends would call, worried, but Jessica started answering the phone for me. Mom isn't feeling well today. Yes, I'll tell her you called. No, better not to visit now. She needs rest. The doctor recommended avoiding excitement. Little by little, the calls dwindled. The visits, which were already rare, stopped completely. I found myself isolated in my own condo, depending more and more on Jessica for everything: groceries, medicine, information from the outside world. She controlled who I heard from, who I spoke with, what I ate, what time I slept, all under the guise of care, of concern for my health. My morning walks in the park, which had been my daily pleasure since I moved to Phoenix, were also gradually reduced. There was always an excuse. The weather wasn't good. I looked tired. My blood pressure must be high. We'll go tomorrow, Mom. Today it's better to rest. And tomorrow never came. By the time I finally realized what was happening, I was already quite fragile. Not physically, thank God. I've always been healthy as a horse, but emotionally, I was isolated, confused, beginning to doubt my own memory and judgment. Jessica had created an environment where any questioning on my part was seen as mental confusion, an old woman's stubbornness, or worse, a sign of encroaching senility. Because let me tell you, that chill can save your life. Mine saved mine. The lawyer friend started showing up more frequently. Mr. Vance, a man of about 45, slicked back hair, always in an impeccable suit, cologne too strong. He spoke to me as if I were 5 years old, or had some comprehension problem. Mrs. Hayes, we need to organize your documents, you know, to make things easier for you in the future. Do you understand what a living trust is? Of course, I understood. I was no fool. I had handled the store's finances for decades. I knew more about documents and bureaucracy than many accountants out there, but I pretended not to understand very well. Buying time, observing, I started to notice the looks between him and Jessica, their body language, the knowing smiles. They weren't just acquaintances or friends. There was something more there. During one of his visits, when I went to the kitchen to get coffee, I came back silently and caught them in an embrace that was anything but professional. I backed away without a sound and returned, making more noise. They separated quickly, adjusting their clothes, feigning composure. I pretended not to notice anything. I served the coffee. I smiled like the naive old lady they thought I was. These documents are important, Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Vance insisted, pushing papers in my direction. It's to facilitate the transition of assets, avoid future bureaucracy, ensure your assets are protected. I looked at the papers, pretended to read with difficulty, asked him to explain terms I knew very well. On one of the pages, I saw something that chilled me, an authorization for the sale of the condo in case of the owner's physical or mental incapacity, to be certified by a designated physician. On another, a transfer of broad power of attorney, giving Jessica the power to manage all my assets and bank accounts. That day I faked a bad dizzy spell. Oh, my blood pressure, everything is spinning. Jessica was visibly irritated but had to postpone the signing of the papers. "We'll come back another day when you're feeling better," the lawyer said, putting the documents back in his briefcase. After he left, Jessica came with a cup of tea. "Here, Mom, this will help you calm down." I noticed a white powder not completely dissolved at the bottom of the cup. It wasn't the first time I'd seen it, but now I was paying closer attention. I pretended to drink it, but poured the contents into the plant when she went to answer the phone. The next day, the plant's leaves were yellowed. Whatever that powder was, it was not good. The nights became increasingly strange. I would lock my bedroom door, but sometimes I would wake up with the feeling that someone had been inside. Objects would move: my glasses, my medicines, my small pieces of jewelry. When I mentioned this to Jessica, she would shake her head with an expression of studied concern. "Mom, you're becoming very forgetful. Just yesterday you were looking for your dentures for half an hour, and they were in your mouth." A detail: I have never worn dentures in my life. I still have all my own teeth, thank God. But she said these things with such conviction that for a second, I almost believed her. She became more and more blatant. She answered all my calls, read my mail before I did, monitored my conversations with neighbors. Mom has early onset Alzheimer's. I heard her say quietly to the building's doorman one day, "If she says anything strange, let me know, okay?" She was setting the perfect stage. An elderly woman with cognitive problems, confused, forgetful, perhaps even paranoid, needing constant supervision. It was her word against mine, and she was planting seeds of doubt in everyone around me. Who would believe a senile old woman against a devoted daughter who gave up her life to care for her sick mother? Luckily, or perhaps by one of those chances God places in our path, I had my opportunity to confirm all my suspicions. One day, she went out quickly to buy bread from the corner bakery. She always took her purse and cell phone, but that morning she was running late to meet someone. I later found out it was the lawyer and rushed out, leaving her laptop open on the living room table. I've never been one to snoop, I swear to God. But something pushed me to glance at the screen. The browser was open, and in the recent history, I saw searches that chilled me to the bone. How to fake natural death in the elderly, decomposition time of bodies in different soils, side effects of sleeping pills in people with high blood pressure, how to obtain a death certificate without a body. I closed the laptop exactly as it was and went back to my room, my legs weak. I locked the door and sat on the bed, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. It was no longer just a vague suspicion, a nameless fear. It was real, concrete, documented. My own daughter was researching ways to kill me. At that moment, I had to make a decision. I could confront her, scream, call the police. But if I did that, and she denied everything, if she played the confused mother, the paranoid elderly card, who would believe me? I had no concrete proof, only what I had seen on the computer. And knowing Jessica, she would have a perfectly plausible explanation for those searches. Maybe she'd say she was writing a crime novel or doing research for a lawyer friend on fraudulent inheritance cases. Direct confrontation was out of the question. I had to be smarter than her. I had to pretend I knew nothing, that I was still the confused and dependent old lady she thought I was. And in the meantime, I had to prepare for whatever she was planning. That night, I pushed the heavy dresser against my bedroom door and slept, or rather, stayed awake with a pair of sewing scissors under my pillow. In the following days, I watched her every move with the eyes of a hawk while pretending to be increasingly frail and confused. It was a dangerous game, but I had no choice. It was my life that was at stake, and that's how we got to that fateful night when she came with the cup of special tea. I already knew there was something wrong with that tea. I had seen its effect on my plant days before, but this time I felt it was different. The smell was stronger, the color darker. Whatever she put in there, it was a larger quantity. It was the dose to knock out a horse that she would later mention to her accomplice. I pretended to drink it, threw it out when I could. I feigned drowsiness. The rest of the story I've already told. How I was placed in a makeshift coffin. How I heard my own daughter planning where to dig my grave. How I found a loose nail, which would be my only hope of survival. What I haven't told yet is how I managed to escape that coffin and what I did for the next 6 months, living like a ghost in my own home, collecting evidence against my daughter while she believed me to be dead. I'll never forget that moment inside the coffin. The smell of damp earth filling my nostrils, the rough wood scratching my back through my thin nightgown, and that almost complete darkness, broken only by a sliver of moonlight coming through a small crack in the poorly nailed lid. I've been through a lot in this life, but nothing compares to the feeling of being trapped in a box, listening to the people who should love you digging your grave. Deeper, Martin. It has to be at least 5 feet. Jessica's voice sounded muffled through the wood, but I would recognize that bossy tone anywhere. It was the same one she used as a teenager, demanding a new outfit. It's fine, Jessica. No one is going to find an old woman buried in the middle of nowhere, replied the male voice, which I now knew belonged to the lawyer, Mr. Vance. This ground is hard as a rock, and it's getting late. The sun will be up soon. Don't be lazy. If someone finds the body before it's time, the whole plan goes down the drain, she retorted irritably. Digging deeper makes the decomposition faster. I read that online. My own blood was discussing the ideal depth for my decomposition. May God forgive me, but at that moment, I felt a rage I never thought I was capable of feeling. It wasn't just fear. It was an indignation so profound it gave me strength beyond what I imagined I had at 75 years of age. Whatever, the man grumbled. After we finish here, how long until the insurance pays out? About 30 days after the declaration of presumed death, Jessica replied, the sound of the shovel digging punctuating her words. I've already bribed the investigator not to look too hard. It will look like she wandered out of the house, disoriented, and probably died of exposure in the desert. And that condo with the mountain view? Is it really worth what you said? More than $800,000. Easily. The realtor is already on standby. As soon as the death certificate is issued, I'll put it up for sale. In 60 days, Max, we'll be rich, honey. Honey. The lawyer wasn't just an accomplice in the crime. He was her lover. Probably the whole time, ever since she came back to take care of me. All part of a cold, calculated plan to get my money, my house, my life. As I listened to that macabre conversation, my hands frantically felt the wood around me, searching for any flaw, any weakness. That's when I realized something. The wood felt familiar to the touch. The knots, the texture, it was second-rate pine, the same kind we sold in the construction section of our hardware store. My daughter had made my coffin with wood from her father's store. There was a poetic cruelty in that which cut me deeper than any nail. I felt the first wave of panic rising in my throat, that primitive scream of terror that every human being has stored away for life or death situations. But I swallowed it back. Screaming now would be signing my death sentence. They would just finish the job more directly, perhaps with a shovel to the head before burying me. I took a deep, shaky breath and told myself, calm down, Eleanor. Think, use your head. You know wood, you know locks. You've worked with this your whole life. This makeshift coffin is no match for you. I continued exploring with my hands, inch by inch. On the right side, I found a protruding nail, poorly fixed, typical of a rushed job. I tried to move it with my fingers, but it was too firm to pull out without a tool. I needed something thin and sturdy to use as a lever. I felt my body, searching for anything I could use. The nightgown had no buttons. I wasn't wearing a necklace or bracelet, but then I remembered the hairpin, that old, sturdy metal hairpin I used to pin back the stubborn strands at the nape of my neck. Slowly, so as not to make a sound, I brought my hand to the back of my neck and found it, almost crying with relief. I know. You're probably thinking, what can an old woman do with a hairpin? But when you've spent a lifetime feeling the smallest metal parts, every little tumbler in a lock, a hairpin isn't just a hairpin anymore. It's a tool. And Walter, God rest his soul, he taught me that the right tool, no matter how small, can open any door, even the door to a coffin. Finished here, I heard the man say outside. Come see if it's good. It's perfect, Jessica's voice replied after a pause. Now let's have some coffee in the car while we wait for sunrise. I don't want to drive back in the dark on this dirt road. And your mother? Isn't it better to finish the job? No need. With the dosage I gave her, her heart should have already stopped. And even if it hasn't, She's locked in a box in the middle of nowhere, weak and doped up. There's no way she can escape. I heard footsteps moving away, the sound of a car door opening, doors slamming. They had gone to have coffee. Coffee? As if they had just finished a common task, like changing a tire or fixing a faucet. Not burying their own mother alive. Now was my chance. With the hairpin in hand, I started working on the loose nail. I positioned the tip of the pin under the nail head and carefully pried, so as not to break my only tool. Years working in the store taught me to respect metal, to understand its resistance and its limits. The nail didn't budge on the first few tries. I changed the angle, trying to find the point of least resistance. "Come on, come on," I murmured softly, as if I could convince the nail to cooperate. My hands were shaking, not from fear now, but from effort and determination. On the fourth or fifth push, I felt the nail give a millimeter. That was all I needed. From there, I worked slowly, patiently, gradually increasing the gap. Every movement was calculated to make the least amount of noise possible. My whole body was sweating, despite the cold of the early morning seeping through the cracks in the wood. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably about 20 minutes, I managed to loosen the nail completely. Now I had a better tool, a nearly 4-inch nail, sharp at the tip. With it, I attacked the other nails around it, one by one, methodically. Some came out with relative ease. Others required more force and ingenuity. I worked in absolute silence, stopping occasionally to listen if they were coming back. I could only hear distant fragments of conversation coming from the direction of the car. They were discussing details of how they would spend the money, completely oblivious to the fact that their victim was actively dismantling their plan, nail by nail. When I loosened the fourth nail, I was able to create an opening large enough to peek outside. The faint light of dawn was beginning to touch the sky, allowing me to see where I was. It was a clearing in a rural area, surrounded by low trees and vegetation typical of the Arizona desert. A few feet from me, I saw the partially dug grave, my final destination in their plan. Further on, maybe 50 yards away, was a car that I recognized as Jessica's, a silver imported model, not very new, but still elegant. She and the man were sitting inside, drinking something from disposable cups, chatting animatedly as if they were on a picnic. I continued working on the nails, now with more urgency. The day was breaking, and they would soon finish their coffee and come to complete the job. When I managed to loosen the sixth nail, the side of the coffin was loose enough for me to try to get out, but I couldn't rush. A sudden movement, a board breaking loudly, and they would come running. With extreme care, I pushed the sideboard outward, creating an opening. It wasn't large, but I was thin. The months of Jessica's care, with controlled meals and appetite-suppressing medication, had reduced my body. I squeezed through slowly, feeling muscles I hadn't used in years protest the effort. First, I got one arm through, then my head, then my shoulders, the hardest part. For a terrifying moment, I was stuck, my shoulder wedged in the irregular opening. I took a deep breath, relaxed my muscles as much as I could, and gave one last push. I slid out onto the soft earth beside the coffin, stifling a cry of pain as a piece of wood scratched my arm. Now I was out, lying next to the grave that was meant to be my tomb. The fresh morning air had never seemed so sweet, but I couldn't afford to savor freedom. I was still in extreme danger. If they saw me, I looked again towards the car. They were still there, but now their body language had changed. They were leaning towards each other, kissing, I realized with disgust. I took advantage of their distraction to drag myself away from the coffin, towards a group of bushes a few yards away. Every movement was a controlled agony. My joints ached, my muscles trembled with exhaustion, and I had scratches and cuts from the nails and rough wood. But adrenaline was a powerful anesthetic. Inch by inch, I moved away, using my elbows and knees to avoid raising dust, like a soldier crawling on an enemy field. When I finally reached the bushes, I allowed myself a moment to catch my breath. In that moment, huddled on the dirt, the only thing louder than her own heart was the silence she'd left behind. The terror was still there, like a cold snake in her gut, but something else was born in that silence too. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. Now, it was about making sure she knew who she had tried to bury. In that moment, huddled on the dirt, the only thing louder than my own heart was the silence she'd left behind. The terror was still there, like a cold snake in my gut, but something else was born in that silence too. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. Now, it was about making sure she knew who she had tried to bury. From there, I could still see the car and the abandoned coffin, but they couldn't see me. I watched as they finished their coffee, threw the cups out, and started walking back towards the grave. The distance didn't allow me to see their expressions when they discovered the empty coffin, but Jessica's scream of rage cut through the morning air like a knife. "Where is she? Where is she?" she shrieked, running around like a madwoman, searching the immediate surroundings. "Impossible. She was drugged," the man replied, sounding more scared than furious. "No one could get out of there in that state. She has to be nearby. Let's look." I shrank further into the bushes, trying to make my 5-year-old body seem smaller than a child's. They began to search the area, each going in a different direction. Jessica was coming dangerously in my direction, using a branch as a stick to beat the low vegetation. At that moment, as if sent from heaven, the man's cell phone rang. The shrill sound broke the morning silence. "Hello? Yes, this is he." "What? No, impossible. I'm out of town." "Are you sure it's today? I thought it was next week." "Damn it, I can't miss that hearing." Jessica stopped searching and went back to him, visibly irritated by the interruption. I only heard fragments of the heated argument that followed. Something about an important case, a rich client, the need to return to Phoenix immediately. "And the old woman?" the man asked, looking around nervously. "She must have dragged herself into the brush," Jessica replied, her voice tense with anger. "But she won't get far. She's weak, confused, in the middle of nowhere. Either she dies of exposure, or some animal finds her first. One way or another, the problem solves itself. And what if someone finds her? If she talks? Who's going to believe a disoriented old woman who says her own daughter tried to kill her? They'll think it's senile delirium. I've been planting that seed for months. Everyone in Phoenix knows my mother is losing her mind. They argued a bit more, but the lawsuit seemed really important. Too important to risk losing over an old woman who already had one foot in the grave anyway, as the man brutally put it. Finally, they decided to leave, but not before Jessica gave a final warning. "If by some miracle you survive and come back home, Mother, know that I will finish what I started. No one will believe you. No one." The words hung in the air like poison as I watched them get in the car and drive off, kicking up dust on the dirt road. Only when the sound of the engine completely faded did I allow myself to take a deep breath and assess my situation. I was alive. That was the main and miraculous fact. But I was also alone, weak, wearing only a thin nightgown, without water, food, or money, in the middle of an abandoned rural property, miles from anywhere. The sun was beginning to rise in the sky, promising a hot day typical of the Arizona summer. I stood up with difficulty, my muscles protesting every movement. I needed to get my bearings. Looking around more carefully, I began to recognize certain landmarks. That old mesquite tree, the rock formation near what was once a corral, the outlines of the ruined house in the distance. With a jolt, I realized where I was. The old Preston Ranch, a friend of my late husband. We used to come here for barbecues in the 80 seconds, when the ranch was still operating, producing alfalfa and cotton. Mr. Preston died without direct heirs, and the property fell into a legal limbo, abandoned for at least 15 years. It was the perfect hiding spot, close enough to Phoenix to be convenient, isolated enough for no one to find a body. Knowing where I was, I could orient myself better. The highway was to the east, maybe about 2 miles through abandoned fields and a small stretch of brush. Under normal conditions, it would be an easy walk. In my current condition, weak, dehydrated, still with traces of the drugs in my system, it would be quite a challenge. But what was the alternative? Stay there and wait for death to truly arrive? I started walking slowly in what I thought was an easterly direction, guiding myself by the morning sun. Each step was a small triumph. The thin nightgown offered little protection against branches and shrubs. Soon my arms and legs were covered in scratches. My bare feet encountered sharp rocks and hidden stumps in the tall grass. After about 20 minutes of painful walking, I found an old well. By some miracle, it still had water. It wasn't clean, it was green with algae and had insects swimming on the surface, but in my situation, it looked like an oasis. I bent down and drank a little, just enough to wet my parched throat. I also washed my face and arms, feeling the coolness renew my strength. Near the well were the remains of a tool shed. The structure had collapsed, but among the debris, I found something precious, an old rubber boot, just the left one, much larger than my size, but it was better than nothing. I also found a piece of tarp that I tied over my shoulders like a makeshift cloak. Thus equipped, a boot on one foot, the other bare, a tarp as a cloak, I resumed my journey. The sun rose relentlessly in the sky, and the heat began to become a new enemy. My mouth dried out quickly, and dizzy spells came in waves, but I kept walking one step after another, repeating to myself, "You survived the Coffin. You'll survive this too." I don't know exactly how long I walked. 2 hours, maybe 3. The sun was already high when I finally heard the distant sound of cars, the highway. I found strength I didn't know I still had, and quickened my pace. The vegetation thinned out until I saw the asphalt shimmering in the heat. There, at the edge of the road, I faced a new dilemma. Asking for help was risky. I was dirty, disheveled, wearing a torn nightgown, a single boot, and a filthy tarp over my shoulders. Who would stop for an old woman looking like this? And if they did stop, what would I say? My daughter tried to bury me alive. It would sound like delirium, exactly as Jessica predicted. Besides, what if the news that I was found reached her before I could properly protect myself? She would finish the job. Of that, I had no doubt. And this time she would be more careful, leaving no chance for escape. It was there, shivering under the relentless sun, that I made the hardest decision of my life. I would not ask for help. Not yet. I would let them think I was dead. Missing, whatever. It's a chilling calculation to have to make. The very systems designed to protect you have been turned against you. For Eleanor, walking out of the desert wasn't the end of her ordeal. It was the beginning of a new, silent war. To win, she would have to become the very ghost her daughter thought she'd created. It's a funny thing, isn't it? Your whole life you're taught to run to the police, to ask for help, but Jessica had spent months poisoning that well. My word against hers? I didn't stand a chance. No, if I was going to get my life back, I couldn't do it by knocking on the front door. I had to become the very ghost she thought she'd made me. I would use this time to recover, gather evidence, build a solid case against my daughter and her accomplice. Only then would I reveal myself, with all the cards in my hand. But for that, I needed to get back to Phoenix on my own, without being recognized. I watched the cars pass for a few minutes, planning my approach. Finally, I saw an old truck slowing down on an uphill stretch. I came out of my hiding place and waved, hoping the driver was the sympathetic type. The truck stopped a few yards ahead, and a middle-aged man with a stubble and a worn-out cap stuck his head out. "Need some help, ma'am?" I quickly improvised a story. My son dropped me off at his house and went to work, but there was a kitchen fire. I managed to get out, but my clothes caught fire. I need to get to Phoenix to find my sister. It wasn't a very convincing story, but the man didn't ask many questions. Maybe he concluded I was just a confused old woman who had gotten lost. Or maybe he saw the genuine desperation in my eyes. "Hop in the back, ma'am. I'm heading to Mesa. From there, you can catch another ride to Phoenix." I thanked him with tears in my eyes and climbed into the truck bed, hiding among crates of produce. The wind in the open truck dried the sweat from my body and brought some relief from the heat. I closed my eyes, exhausted beyond comprehension, but still afraid to sleep. What if this was all a dream? What if I woke up back in the Coffin? From Mesa to Phoenix, I managed to get a ride with an elderly couple who were returning from visiting their son. I told them a modified version of the fire story, and they were so compassionate that they insisted on giving me an old t-shirt from the husband and a wide-brimmed hat from the wife to protect me from the sun. It was late afternoon when I finally arrived on the outskirts of Phoenix. I asked to be dropped off at a random bus stop, far from my neighborhood. I needed to think about my next step. I couldn't just go back home. Jessica would probably be there. And even if she wasn't, it would be the first place she would look for me. Sitting at that bus stop, a ragged old woman no one would look at twice, I began to formulate my plan. First, I needed a place to stay, some hideout where I could recover and plan my next moves. Then, I would need money, documents, some way to move around without being detected. But above all, I needed to understand exactly what Jessica was doing, what the extent of her plan was, who else was involved besides the lawyer, how much of my money had already been siphoned off. Only with these answers could I adequately protect myself and ensure she paid for what she did. The obvious solution would be to go to the police, but without concrete evidence, it would be my word against hers. And she had planted the seed of doubt in everyone around me. The elderly mother with cognitive problems, confused, maybe even paranoid. As I myself heard her say to her lover, "Who's going to believe a disoriented old woman who says her own daughter tried to kill her?" I needed to be smarter. I needed irrefutable proof. And to get that proof, I needed to be where she would least expect me, right under her nose, watching her every move, recording every incriminating word. That's when I made the riskiest and, in retrospect, the bravest decision of my life. I would return to my own home, but not through the front door. I would live hidden like a ghost in the one place she would never look for me, the storage closet she didn't even know existed. The condo building was old, built in the late 70s and full of forgotten quirks. One of them was a disused janitor's closet in the basement, tucked away behind the water heaters. Walter and I discovered it years ago when a pipe burst. It wasn't on any of the building's official floor plans, and over the decades, everyone seemed to have forgotten it existed. It became our secret storage spot for old paint cans and tools we rarely used. Jessica didn't know about this place. She was already long gone from home when we found it, and in the few times she visited, she never had any interest in exploring the dusty corners of the building, as she called them. That would be my refuge, my headquarters for the most important operation of my life, proving that my own daughter had tried to kill me and ensuring she paid for it. She was already long gone from home when we started using it, and in the few times she came back for visits, she never had any interest in exploring the dusty corners of the building, as she called them. That would be my refuge, my headquarters for the most important operation of my life, proving that my own daughter had tried to kill me and ensuring she paid for it. With this plan in mind, I waited for nightfall before starting to move towards my building. Phoenix, like any big city, has its shadows, where invisible people move unnoticed. That night, I was one of them, just another homeless old woman looking for a place to sleep. I reached my building around 10 at night. I knew every inch of that place, every blind spot of the security cameras, every shift change of the doormen. I knew, for example, that at 10 p.m., Mr. Antonio always went to the bathroom, leaving the front desk empty for exactly 7 minutes, more than enough time for someone to slip in through the back, where the lock on the service door had been broken for months. I entered unseen and went up the service stairs to the basement, where the closet was. Using a technique Walter had taught me decades ago, I managed to open the simple door with a piece of wire I found on the way. Inside was exactly as I remembered. A 6x6-foot cubicle, full of old brooms, cracked buckets, and expired cleaning products. But to me, at that moment, it felt like a palace. I arranged a corner as best I could, using old burlap sacks as a makeshift mattress. I was exhausted beyond physical comprehension, and emotionally drained by everything I had been through in the last 24 hours. But before I allowed myself to rest, I had to do one thing: check if Jessica had already reported me missing. I knew that on the 11th floor lived Mrs. Peterson, one of my bingo friends whom Jessica had alienated me from. She always left her kitchen window open, and from there you could hear everything happening in her apartment, including the television she kept at a deafening volume due to her hearing loss. I crept up to the 11th floor and positioned myself near her kitchen window. As expected, the television was on at a deafening volume, and it was the local news. The anchor was speaking in that serious tone reserved for tragic news. The disappearance of Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, 75, who suffers from early-stage Alzheimer's. According to her daughter, Jessica Hayes, Her mother left the house during the night while everyone was asleep and has not been seen since. The police are asking that any information about the elderly woman's whereabouts be reported immediately. My face appeared on the screen, a recent photo, taken by Jessica herself, where I looked particularly frail and confused. Beside it, my daughter was crying crocodile tears, begging for help to find her dear, disoriented mommy. Her plan was in full swing. I was officially missing, probably dead, a victim of my own mental confusion. Soon, if no one found me, would come the declaration of presumed death. Then the insurance, the sale of the condo, everything she and her lawyer lover had planned. Little did they know that the disoriented old lady had not only escaped being buried alive, but was now about to become the hunter, no longer the prey. From that moment on, I would live like a ghost in my own home, observing, collecting evidence, preparing my revenge. I returned to my hiding place in the basement, my head buzzing with plans. I would need supplies, tools, a way to record conversations and movements. I would need to observe Jessica's routine, discover her contacts, her accomplices, her passwords. I would need to be patient, methodical, ruthless, but all of that was for the next day. That night, I finally allowed myself to collapse on my makeshift bed. I was alive, against all odds. I had survived the worst my own daughter could do to me. What came next would be difficult, dangerous, perhaps even more challenging than escaping the coffin. But one thing I was sure of, Jessica had made the worst possible mistake. She had underestimated her mother. The first week of living like a ghost in my own home was the hardest. My makeshift apartment in the storage closet was the size of a large closet. I could barely lie down, stretched out. The cold, concrete floor, even with the burlap sacks I used as a mattress, punished my old bones during the night. There was no bathroom, of course, so I had to use a bucket in emergencies and empty it in the middle of the night when no one would be around. Food was another problem. I only had what I could scavenge from the building's trash cans or leftovers left in the staff break room, but none of that mattered compared to what I needed to do. For the first few days, I dedicated myself to learning the rhythms of the building. The doormen's schedules, the cleaning ladies, the superintendents, the residents' routines. I knew I would have to move through the building without being seen, and that required detailed knowledge of every corner, every camera blind spot, every moment of staff distraction. Most importantly, of course, was understanding Jessica's movements. She had taken over my apartment as her own, sleeping in my room, using my things, pretending to mourn my loss to neighbors and friends. In the first few days after my disappearance, she maintained an appearance of appropriate grief. Red eyes, dark clothes, a trembling voice. But even in those moments, I saw flashes of what she really felt. The restrained smile when she talked on the phone about resolving pending matters. The expensive glass of wine she drank alone at night, silently celebrating her successful plan. To access my own apartment without being seen, I used a trick Walter had taught me decades ago. Our building, like many old buildings in Phoenix, had ventilation ducts that connected the floors, small, dusty, forgotten by the current management. The duct that passed through my bathroom had an opening large enough for someone my size to get through, as long as you knew exactly where the entrance was, hidden behind a false panel in the service hallway. On the third night, when I was sure Jessica was fast asleep thanks to the 2 bottles of wine she drank celebrating with the lawyer, I made my first foray into the apartment. I slid through the duct, feeling spiderwebs stick to my face, and carefully opened the panel that led into the cabinet under the bathroom sink. Moving like a cat, I explored my own home as an intruder. What I found disgusted me. Jessica was already changing everything. My picture frames were turned face down on the shelves. My clothes were piled in donation boxes. Decorator catalogs were spread across the table. In the room that had been mine for decades, her clothes already occupied half the closet. On the nightstand, a handwritten list caught my attention. Things to sell divided by throwaway. It was practically an inventory of my life. Furniture, jewelry, mementos, all with little notes about estimated value or trash. But what interested me most was in the office. There, in a desk organizer, I found a folder labeled with my name. Inside were copies of my will, the real one. The life insurance policy, the condo deed documents, and more falsified versions of these same documents with subtle changes that benefited Jessica. A power of attorney with my signature, obviously forged, giving her full control over my assets. A medical certificate signed by a doctor I had never heard of, declaring that I suffered from early-stage senile dementia. I took pictures of everything with an old cell phone I found in the building's trash and managed to get working. It had no SIM card, but the camera served to document evidence. Then, silently, I put everything back in its exact place and returned to my hiding spot. I needed more, much more than documents. I needed to hear confessions, plans, details of the crime, and for that, I needed listening equipment. The problem was, I had no money to buy anything sophisticated, and I couldn't risk leaving the building much. That's when 50 years of working with hardware proved more useful than ever. With parts collected from the trash old wires, components from broken radios, fragments of discarded cell phones, I began to assemble makeshift microphones. Now, don't go thinking I turned into some fancy spy. It was nothing like that. It's just about knowing what connects to what. When you've spent a lifetime fixing everything from a faulty doorbell to a blender motor, you learn that most things are just wires and a bit of power. Those microphones were ugly, mind you, but they didn't need to be pretty. They just needed to listen. They weren't pretty or sophisticated, but they worked. I just had to connect them to the old cell phone, which recorded everything to its internal memory. Over the next few nights, whenever Jessica left, I would sneak into the apartment and install my bugs in strategic locations, under the dining table, where she often talked with the lawyer, behind the living room sofa, taped under the headboard of the bed. Small, camouflaged, practically invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look. The recordings I got in those first few weeks confirmed my worst suspicions. Jessica and Mr. Vance, who I now knew had been her lover for at least a year, had not only planned my death, they had done the same to other elderly people. The old man from Glendale's case was easier, I heard the lawyer say one night, while drinking wine on my sofa. That one really did have Alzheimer's. No one questioned it when he got lost during a walk in the park. And that widow from Peoria? Jessica asked, laughing. What was her name again? Mrs. Nelson. That one was tricky, remember? Her son showed up out of nowhere from the United States. We had to wait another 6 months to wrap it up, but it was worth it. That condo on the canal brought in a good chunk of change. My blood ran cold as I realized I wasn't their first victim. There was a pattern, a perverse business of preying on vulnerable elderly people, isolating them, forging documents, and then making them disappear. How many others had been buried alive, as they tried to do to me? How many families believed their parents or grandparents had simply wandered off due to old age? The police also came to the apartment a few times, always accompanied by a tearful Jessica. Hiding in the ventilation duct, I heard the investigator, a man with a tired and disinterested voice, say that missing elderly cases rarely had a positive outcome. Usually, they either wander into the desert, ma'am, or they're victims of a robbery, and the body is disposed of. After 2 weeks, the chances of finding them alive are almost zero. I understand, my daughter replied with a perfect tremor in her voice. But how long do we have to wait to, resolve the practical matters? The condo, the bills. By law, it's 30 days of intensive searches. After that, you file for a declaration of presumed death, which takes another 30 days or so to be issued if there's no contestation. After the officer left, she immediately called the lawyer. 60 days, honey. Do you have a buyer for the condo yet? The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. My life in the hideout was one of extreme deprivation. I ate what I could scavenge. I used the building's facilities only in the dead of night. I bathed rarely, using the garden hose out back when I was sure no one would see. The chill of the approaching fall punished my bones, and I had only a thin blanket I found in the janitor's closet. Several times I was almost discovered. One night, the cleaning lady decided to do a spring cleaning in the storage room where I was hiding. Luckily, I was on one of my expeditions through the building. When I returned, I found everything reorganized, but my little corner behind the old boxes was untouched. She simply hadn't looked carefully enough to notice the signs of my presence. Another time, The superintendent came in while I was sleeping. I woke up to the sound of the door opening and only had time to curl up even tighter in my dark corner, holding my breath. He grabbed some tools and left without realizing someone was living there. The loneliness was perhaps the hardest part. You might be wondering how a person can live like that, like a rat in the walls. Let me tell you, you don't live, you endure. Every ache in your bones, every hunger pang, it all just becomes fuel. It reminds you why you're there. You learn to make yourself small, smaller than a ghost, all for that one moment when you can finally prove you're still alive. I spent weeks without exchanging a word with anyone, only listening to others' conversations, watching life happen around me without being able to participate. I missed my bingo friends, the chats with the doorman, even the arguments with the lady at the bakery about which bread was freshest. The only company I had were the cockroaches and a spider that made its home in a corner of the ceiling. I named it Walter in honor of my late husband. At least it protected me from the mosquitoes. But the silence was the worst part. Not the absence of noise, but the weight of it. In the long, cold hours between my expeditions, I would sit in the dark and feel the full force of my daughter's betrayal. It wasn't a sharp, clean pain like a knife wound. It was a slow, seeping poison. I would trace the lines on my own hands that had changed her diapers, braided her hair, and held her when she was sick, and wonder at what point they had become the hands of a stranger to her. I replayed every memory, every birthday, every argument, searching for the exact moment the rust began to form on her soul. Did the little girl who loved my gumbo ever truly exist? Or was she just a role played by the monster who was waiting to emerge? In that dusty closet, I mourned my daughter twice, once for the woman she had become, and again for the child I now realized I may have never truly known. My biggest fear was getting sick. At 75, without my blood pressure medication, without medical care, any health problem could be fatal. I developed a persistent cough from the dampness of the storage room, and there were nights when fever made me delirious. In those moments, I almost gave in, almost ran out screaming for help. But then I would remember Jessica's voice, planning where to dig my grave, and the anger gave me renewed strength. The turning point in my situation came from where I least expected it. The building received deliveries of bottled water every Thursday. The delivery guy, a skinny young man of about 25, always left the jugs in the service hallway near my hiding place. From watching him so much, I learned his routine. He always checked the previous deliveries to see how much each apartment consumed to predict the following week's demand. One day, I heard him mutter to himself, "Strange. Apartment 5B always ordered 2 jugs a week when there were 2 people. Now that there's only 1, it's still consuming the same amount." 5B was my apartment. Jessica, alone, shouldn't be using as much water as she and I did together. But she was, because she took a bath every night, a luxury I, being frugal, rarely allowed myself. The following week, the young man, Ryan, according to his name tag, returned with the same observation. This time he added, "And the trash looks like it's from 2 people, too." Something strange is happening in that apartment. I made a risky decision. As he was leaving, I opened a crack in the closet door and whispered, "Psst, mister." He nearly dropped the water jugs in fright. He looked around, confused, until he saw me partially hidden in the darkness. "Who are you? What are you doing in there?" "I'm the owner of 5B, the one who disappeared," I whispered, making air quotes. His eyes widened. "The old lady who vanished? The mother of the lady who cries every time I deliver water?" "The very same. But I can't explain everything right now. I need help." He hesitated, looking around, clearly thinking I was some kind of ghost or an escapee from somewhere. But something in my eyes must have convinced him. "What do you need?" "Food, blood pressure medicine, and a cell phone with a SIM card, if possible, on your next delivery." A week later, he left a bag hidden behind the empty jugs. Inside, I found bread, fruit, a bottle of water, generic blood pressure pills, and a cheap prepaid cell phone with credit. There was also a note. "My grandmother also suffered with kids who only wanted her social security. You can count on me." Ryan became my guardian angel and informant. Every week he brought basic supplies and information he picked up on his deliveries, who was entering and leaving the apartment, conversations he overheard, suspicious movements. It was through him that I found out Jessica was already interviewing realtors to sell the condo as soon as the death certificate was issued. With better food and the right medication, my health stabilized, and I could focus completely on gathering evidence. The phone Ryan brought was crucial. Now I could record conversations with better quality and store the files securely. One Thursday, about 3 months after my disappearance, I captured a particularly incriminating conversation. Jessica and the lawyer were drunk, celebrating prematurely. "The judge is signing the declaration of presumed death next week," he said excitedly. I spoke with my contact at the courthouse. "It's all set." "Finally," she replied. The sound of clinking glasses. "How long until the insurance pays out?" "Another 30 days for the bank transfers, but the buyer for the condo is ready to close as soon as the declaration is issued. We could have half the money in 2 weeks. $800,000 for the condo, plus $500,000 from the insurance. Almost $1.3 million, Martin. We can buy that house in San Diego we saw. There will be money left over to invest and still take a trip to Europe. Your plan was perfect, honey. Much better than the other cases. Gradual isolation, deterioration of mental image, no suspicion. The only mistake was not checking if she had actually died in the coffin," Jessica said with a slightly bitter tone. "But whatever. Even if she survived for a few hours, she ended up dying somewhere on that ranch. No one will find the body, and even if they do, they'll think she wandered off and died of natural causes. Can you imagine if she had managed to come back?" The lawyer laughed. "It would be like a horror movie, the ghost of the mother coming back to haunt the evil daughter. It's not funny, Martin. She could have ruined everything. If only they knew the ghost was just a few yards away, recording every word." As the weeks passed, I put together a complete dossier. In addition to the recordings, I had photos of the forged documents, copies of printed emails I found where they discussed other similar cases, even the proof of payment to the investigator who was bribed not to look for me too hard. But the final piece of the puzzle came when I decided to investigate the other cases they mentioned more deeply. Using the phone Ryan gave me, I searched for missing elderly people in Glendale and Peoria in recent years. I easily found the cases. A 7-8-year-old man with Alzheimer's who got lost during a walk in the park, and an 8-1-year-old widow who left her house disoriented and was never seen again. In both cases, close relatives, a niece in the first case, a daughter in the second, sold the properties and received insurance payouts shortly after the declarations of presumed death. With more investigation, I discovered that the same lawyer, Mr. Martin Vance, had represented the families in both cases. It was the complete criminal pattern. I had enough evidence to take Jessica and the lawyer to justice, but there was still a crucial problem. How could I, a dead woman, present this evidence without being immediately dismissed as a lunatic, or worse, being permanently silenced by the pair when they discovered I was alive? I needed someone in the police, someone who would listen to my story with an open mind and protect my safety. Through Ryan, I learned of a detective who specialized in crimes against the elderly, Detective Miller. She had recently broken up a ring that scammed retirees and had a reputation for being incorruptible. Using the phone, I sent an enigmatic email to the police station, mentioning the Glendale and Peoria cases, suggesting a connection, and promising compelling evidence. I signed off only as a witness. To my surprise, I received a reply the same day with a personal phone number and the message, "Call me. We can speak discreetly." After 5 months of living as a ghost, collecting evidence, surviving in the shadows, I finally had an ally. I called the provided number from a payphone near the building during one of my rare nightly outings. "Detective Miller, this is Eleanor Hayes. You've probably heard of me. I'm the elderly woman who disappeared in Phoenix 5 months ago. Except I didn't disappear. My own daughter tried to bury me alive." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, then the calm, professional voice of the detective. "Mrs. Hayes, that is a very serious accusation. Can you prove what you're saying?" "I have recordings, documents, photos, and most importantly, I'm alive when I should be dead." We scheduled a meeting for the next night, at a neutral location, the house of a trusted friend of the detective, on the outskirts of Phoenix. It would be risky to leave my hiding place for so long, but I had no choice. It was time to emerge from the shadows and reclaim my life. Whatever your answer, one thing is certain. That night, as I prepared for the meeting with the detective, I felt a contradictory mix of emotions. Relief at finally being able to leave the shadows, fear of what might happen if Jessica found out, sadness for the daughter I had lost forever. Because even if she were arrested and later released, she would never truly be my daughter again, and I admit, a certain dark satisfaction in imagining the Sazin expression on her face when she realized her perfect plan had failed in the most spectacular way possible. I carefully placed the evidence in a folder Ryan had brought me, put on clean clothes he had helped me get, and waited for nightfall. The meeting with the detective was set for 9 p.m. From that point on, there was no going back. I would officially emerge from the world of the dead, and Jessica would have to face the consequences of her actions. But how exactly did this meeting happen? How did the detective react to my evidence? And how did we plan the arrest of my daughter and her accomplice? That night, on my way to meet with Detective Miller, I felt a pit in my stomach that had nothing to do with my 6 months living in the storage closet. It was fear mixed with hope. Fear that something would go wrong, that they wouldn't believe me, that Jessica would find out too soon. Hope of finally getting my life, my identity, my dignity back. Ryan helped me get to the agreed-upon location, a simple house in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Phoenix. He drove his old car there, dropping me off 2 blocks away as a precaution. "Good luck, Mrs. Hayes," he said, squeezing my hand warmly. "You're the bravest person I've ever met." Detective Miller was waiting for me on the porch. A woman in her 50s, short gray hair, an attentive gaze that seemed to assess every detail. When she saw me, her eyes widened slightly. Perhaps she expected someone less haggard, less aged by months of deprivation. Or maybe she was just surprised to see a dead woman walking towards her. "Mrs. Hayes?" she asked, extending her hand. "What's left of her?" I replied, trying to smile. Inside the house, I met the detective's friend, a retired social worker who had worked with elderly victims of family violence. The atmosphere was welcoming, with hot tea and cookies on the table. For the first time in months, I felt a bit of the comfort of a real home. I told my story from beginning to end, omitting nothing. Jessica's return after years of estrangement, the gradual isolation she imposed, the suspicious medications, the night of the special tea, the coffin, the ranch, my dramatic escape. Then, the months living in hiding, collecting evidence, surviving in the shadows of my own home. As I spoke, I opened the evidence folder. The audio recordings, the photos of the forged documents, the proofs of bribery, the research on the other similar cases in neighboring cities. The detective listened with full attention, making occasional notes, her face hardening as the scope of the crime became clear. In 23 years on the force, she finally said, "I've never seen anything like it. The sophistication of the plan, the cruelty, and your resilience, Mrs. Hayes. It's extraordinary that you survived, let alone managed to gather all this evidence." "What happens now?" I asked, exhausted after reliving it all. "Now," she replied, with a determined gleam in her eyes, "we plan how to catch your daughter and the lawyer red-handed with irrefutable evidence and how to do it while ensuring your safety." We spent the next 2 hours devising the plan. The detective explained that, although my evidence was substantial, a stronger case would be built if we could catch them openly discussing the crime, or even better, confessing. For that, we would need a carefully planned trap. "When exactly is the declaration of presumed death issued?" she asked. "According to what I heard on the recordings, it should be next week, and the insurance pays out within 30 days after that." "Perfect. We'll move when the money hits her account. That's when they'll be most confident, most careless." The plan was bold but simple in essence. I would rise from the dead at the exact moment Jessica and the lawyer were celebrating their success. The police would be in position, recording everything. My sudden appearance, if all went as expected, would provoke reactions and perhaps impulsive confessions. "Are you sure you want to do this, Mrs. Hayes?" the detective asked with concern. "You'll be face to face with people who tried to kill you. We can find another approach." "I am absolutely sure," I replied without hesitation. I want to look my daughter in the eyes when she realizes she has failed. I want her to know she underestimated the old woman she tried to bury. In the following weeks, I remained in my hiding place. But now, with a crucial difference, I was no longer alone. Detective Miller kept in regular contact through the phone Ryan had given me, updating me on the case's developments. A small team of trusted police officers was assigned to the operation, all sworn to absolute secrecy. Meanwhile, through my listening devices, I followed Jessica's preparations. As predicted, the declaration of presumed death was issued, and the insurance process moved forward without a hitch. She already had interested buyers for the condo, and was planning a small celebration for when the insurance money came through. "Just the two of us, honey," she said to the lawyer one night. "French champagne, caviar, music, the beginning of our new life." The insurance money, my $500,000, was deposited on a Wednesday morning. I knew this from the shriek of joy Jessica let out when she checked the balance on her computer. She immediately called the lawyer. "It's here. We're celebrating tonight. It was the signal we had been waiting for." I called the detective. "It's tonight." The next few hours were a flurry of intense preparation. The detective and her team set up an observation post in an empty apartment in the building across the street, with audio and video equipment pointed at my windows. Other officers positioned themselves strategically in my building, disguised as delivery men or visitors. I spent the day at a nearby hotel where I could take a proper shower for the first time in months, eat a full meal, and rest in a real bed. A policewoman helped me get ready, washed and cut my hair. She lent me clean clothes, even a little makeup to hide my extreme exhaustion. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a thinner, older version of myself, but it was still me. Eleanor Hayes, 75 years old, survivor. No longer a shadow hiding in a storage room, but a woman ready to reclaim her life. At 8 o'clock at night, I received a message. "They're in the apartment. Loud music, champagne open. It's time." An unmarked police car drove me to my building. I entered through the back, using the same secret passage I had used for months. But this time, instead of hiding, I took the service elevator up to my floor. 2 plainclothes officers accompanied me, keeping a discreet distance. I stopped in front of the door of my own apartment. From inside, I could hear soft music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. For a moment, I hesitated, not out of fear, but to absorb the enormity of the moment. 6 months of survival, of planning, culminating in this instant. I took the key I had always carried with me, even during my months in hiding, from my pocket. I took a deep breath and opened the door without knocking. 6 months of hiding in the dark. 6 months of survival. It all comes down to this single moment, to the turning of a key. This isn't just about justice anymore. It's about reclaiming a life that was stolen. Prepare yourself, because the ghost of Eleanor Hayes is about to come home. The scene I found looked like something out of a movie. Jessica and the lawyer were sitting on my sofa, champagne glasses in hand, a coffee table laden with expensive appetizers. In the corners of the room, boxes were already half filled with my belongings, separating what would be worth selling, I imagine. For a second, no one moved. They looked at the door, expecting to see an invited guest. When they recognized who it was, the woman who was supposed to be dead and buried on an abandoned ranch time seemed to freeze. She didn't scream, didn't run, just turned white as if she had seen a ghost. And, in a way, she had. The glass slipped from her fingers, spilling champagne on the carpet I had bought decades ago when we moved into that apartment. "Hello, dear," I said with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. "Sorry to interrupt the party. I didn't receive an invitation." The lawyer was the first to react, jumping to his feet. This is impossible. You were dead." "Correct," I completed, taking a step into the room. "In the coffin you made with wood from my Walter's store, in the grave you dug on that abandoned ranch of old Mr. Preston's. Is that what we're talking about?" Jessica finally found her voice, a strangled whisper. "Mom, how? Did I survive? How did I escape? How am I here now?" I took another step forward. "I'm sure you're curious. After all, you planned everything so carefully, didn't you? The gradual isolation, the tampered medications, the special tea with a dose to knock out a horse. It's a shame you underestimated the old woman you wanted to see dead." The lawyer started to back towards the door but was blocked by one of the officers who had entered silently. Another appeared in the kitchen doorway. Jessica, realizing what was happening, tried to change her strategy. "Mom, thank God, we were so worried. You disappeared. We thought you had died." Her voice was suddenly choked with fake tears. I shook my head, almost with pity. "It's not going to work, Jessica. I have everything recorded. Every conversation about the insurance, about selling the condo, about the other elderly people you killed. Every detail of the plan, including the part where you said, 'Next time there won't be a miracle, you stubborn old woman.'" Her face transformed. The tears dried instantly, replaced by an expression of pure hatred I never thought I would see directed at me, much less from my own daughter. "You should have died in that coffin," she hissed. "It would have been easier for everyone." "Easier for you, certainly," I replied, feeling an immense sadness despite the victory. "Easier to take my money, my house, everything I built with hard work for decades. Easier than working honestly, like your father and I did our whole lives." Detective Miller entered at that moment, accompanied by 2 more officers, Jessica Hayes and Mr. 5, Martin Vance. "You are under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, forgery, racketeering, and other crimes that will be detailed at the station." As the officers read them their rights and put on the handcuffs, Jessica kept her eyes fixed on me, no longer with hatred, but with something worse. A complete emptiness, as if I meant absolutely nothing to her. "Why?" I asked, almost against my will. "Not for the money. It can't be just that. Why so much hatred? So much coldness?" For a moment I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, with a twisted smile, "I will never forget," she said. "Because it was easy. Because I could. Because you old people are all the same. Weak, confused, stuck in the past. A burden no one wants to carry." The words hit me like a punch, not for their cruelty, but for the absolute absence of any human feeling. There was nothing left of the girl I once held in my arms, whom I taught to walk, to talk, to dream if that girl ever truly existed. "You're mistaken," I finally replied as the officers led her away. "We are not weak. We survive things you can't even imagine." Watching them lead her away, there was no satisfaction in it. You see, you think you want justice, you think you want victory, but when you look at the empty space where your child used to be, and all that's left is this cold stranger, you realize you haven't won anything. You've just survived the final loss. And that's the heaviest burden of all. And if there's one thing I've learned in the last 6 months, it's that even at 75, I'm still strong enough to defeat someone like you. That was the last time I spoke to my daughter. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The case exploded in the local and then national media. Elderly woman presumed dead reappears and exposes murderous daughter. The sensational headlines multiplied. Reporters camped outside my building. Curious neighbors approached me in the elevator. Old acquaintances appeared out of nowhere wanting to hear the full story. The trial was relatively quick, thanks to the abundance of evidence. The recordings, the forged documents, my detailed testimony, and especially Jessica's impulsive confession at the time of her arrest, left no room for doubt. She and the lawyer were sentenced to 30 years in prison, each for attempted murder, plus various other financial crimes. More shocking was the discovery that there weren't just 3 cases: mine, Mrs. Nelson's from Peoria, and the gentleman from Glendale. The investigation revealed a total of 7 elderly victims of their scheme over the past 3 years in different cities in the Phoenix metro area. 5 of them were presumed dead, their bodies never found. Only I, and miraculously, Mrs. Nelson, who had been found wandering confused on a highway months after her disappearance, survived to tell the story. When the dust settled, I faced a home that no longer felt like my own. Every corner held a ghost of the betrayal. The armchair where Jessica pretended to care, the kitchen where she brewed her poison, even Walter's portrait on the wall seemed to watch me with sorrow. I realized that to truly be reborn, I had to leave the tomb she had created for me a second time. Selling the condo wasn't a financial decision, it was an act of liberation. I didn't just sell a property, I sold the painful memories attached to it. I found a small apartment with a sun-filled balcony, a place with no history where I could breathe again. The financial security was a relief, yes, but the real challenge was rebuilding the architecture of my own heart, the trust that had been shattered, the innocence that had been stolen. That was the real work. For months, I had nightmares about the coffin, waking up, sweating, and screaming in the middle of the night. I developed an irrational fear of enclosed, dark spaces. Even after moving, I kept all the lights on and the doors open, unable to bear any sense of confinement. A psychologist specializing in trauma helped me process everything. What you've lived through, she would say, is something few people could endure without completely breaking. The fact that you're here, relatively whole, is a testament to your inner strength. Little by little, I began to rebuild not just my practical life, but my ability to trust, to connect, to find joy in the little things. I started taking my walks in the park every morning again. I rediscovered the pleasure of reading a good book on a rainy afternoon. I began attending a new craft group where I made sincere friends. Ryan, my guardian angel during the months in hiding, became like a grandson to me. He visited me regularly, sometimes bringing his girlfriend, and later their newborn son, who to my great emotion was named Walter, in honor of my late husband. Detective Miller also became a constant presence in my life. At first, out of professional concern, then out of genuine friendship. It was she who suggested I turn my experience into something positive. You have a unique knowledge of how predators target vulnerable seniors. You could help others protect themselves. Thus was born Senior Watch, a vigilance and support group for the elderly that started small with meetings in my living room and grew to become a respected organization throughout the Phoenix metro area. We gave talks at community centers, distributed informational brochures, offered a hotline for reporting abuse and for support. And most importantly, we created a network of seniors who looked out for each other, breaking the isolation that makes so many of us vulnerable. Age is not synonymous with fragility, was our motto, but with wisdom and resilience. At one of these talks, I met Mr. L. Arthur, a 75-year-old widower who had been through a similar experience, not as dramatic as mine, but equally painful. His son had sold his house while he was hospitalized, leaving him practically on the street. We started by talking about our shared experiences, then about books, music, cornbread recipes. I wouldn't call it a romance. We're too old for that nonsense, as we joke. But it's a sweet companionship, a mutual support, a safe harbor in a world that so often treats the elderly as disposable. Sometimes, when we're sitting on the balcony watching the sunset, our hands find each other without words, and that's enough. 3 years have passed since that night I was resurrected in the middle of Jessica's party. Today, at 75, I feel more alive, stronger, and, paradoxically, younger than I felt before it all happened. I carry scars, of course, who lives this long and doesn't? But I also carry the certainty that I survived, the worst that could happen to me, and came out on the other side, not just whole, but renewed. If there is one lesson I would like to leave for those who hear my story, it is this: never underestimate an elderly person. Our bodies may be slower, our skin more wrinkled, but we carry within us decades of experience, of overcoming, of learning. Age may weaken the body, but the spirit of survival only grows stronger when tested. Sometimes, when I walk on the park trail at dawn, I think of Jessica. Not with hatred that would only consume me from within, but with a kind of distant pity. She thought she was eliminating a burden, a useless old woman who was just in the way of her plans. But what she eliminated was the only person who loved her unconditionally from the first day of her life. What greater prison can there be than the inability to love and be loved? In contrast, despite everything I've been through, I am free. Free to live each day as a gift, to help others in need, to feel the sun on my skin and be grateful for another sunrise. Free to be exactly who I am. A 75-year-old lady with white hair, laugh lines, hands calloused from work, and a story of survival that I hope can inspire others. I am Eleanor Hayes. I am 75 years old, and I am not a victim. I am a survivor. This isn't just my story. It's a testament to the strength that can be found in the most unexpected places in a hairpin, in the kindness of a stranger, in the heart of an old woman who refused to be erased. There are countless stories like mine, hidden in the quiet homes on your street. Stories of resilience that need a voice. If my journey has touched you, I invite you to listen to more. Subscribe to our channel and hear from other women who turned their deepest wounds into their greatest power. Click on one of the videos you see on the screen now, because every story shared is a light that pushes back the darkness, reminding the world to never, ever underestimate a lady with white hair.